today we're signing, this is very historic, an executive order establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve and digital assets stockpile. This is a promise that you made throughout the campaign, and today we're keeping that promise. The reserve will be capitalized with Bitcoin that the federal government already owns, so it won't cost taxpayers a dime. This is like a digital Fort Knox for digital gold. And premature sales of Bitcoin over the past years cost American taxpayers over $17 billion in lost value because we didn't have a long-term strategy.
Right.
Now we do. So.
And this is something you believe in?
100%, yeah.
Okay.
And the whole community believes in it.
Very good. And I made the promise, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Hola a todos, yo soy Edu. Este 6 de marzo, el presidente Donald Trump firmó una orden ejecutiva que está sacudiendo los cimientos de la economía global. La creación de la Reserva Estratégica de Bitcoin y la Reserva de Activos Digitales. Y como si eso no fuera suficiente, el 7 de marzo se celebró la primera cumbre cripto de la Casa Blanca.
Welcome to the first ever White House Digital Assets Summit. Last year I promised to make America the Bitcoin superpower of the world, and we're taking historic action to deliver on that promise.
Your administration is moving at tech speed.
We are going to keep the U.S. the dominant reserve currency in the world, and we will use stable coins to do that.
Technology is at the foundation of the Trump presidency.
This is truly a historic day, and as a crypto founder, I couldn't be more proud to be part of your administration.
No one in this room could have envisioned this just a couple years ago.
We want to stay at the forefront of everything. This is a big day. Being in the White House is a big deal, and you have great support. Thank you all very much.
A pesar de estos eventos sin precedentes, Bitcoin y las criptomonedas se desplomaron. ¿Qué está sucediendo? Esto se pone salvaje. Quédate hasta el final que te lo voy a explicar todo. Antes de continuar, te invito a que te suscribas a este canal, activa la campanita de notificaciones, dale like y comparte para que nadie se pierda ninguna noticia del mundo de las criptomonedas. Gracias por tu apoyo y disfruta del video. Trump firmó una orden ejecutiva para que el gobierno de Estados Unidos almacene oficialmente Bitcoin como un activo estratégico. ¿Cómo lo están haciendo? Usando los 200,000 Bitcoins que el gobierno ya tiene en su poder. Estos fueron confiscados de operaciones criminales como la de Silk Road. Y lo mejor, no le costará ni un centavo a los contribuyentes. Trump quiere que Estados Unidos sea el primero en la fila para dominar el juego del oro digital. David Sachs, el zar cripto de la Casa Blanca, explicó la diferencia entre la Reserva Estratégica de Bitcoin y la Reserva de Activos Digitales en la política del gobierno de Estados Unidos. La Reserva Estratégica de Bitcoin se trata de una acumulación de Bitcoin con el objetivo de preservarlo a largo plazo, funcionando como un Fort Knox digital. La intención es no venderlo nunca. Mencionó que en su momento el gobierno tenía 400,000 Bitcoins, pero vendió la mitad por 360 millones, lo que habría valido más de 17,000 millones de dólares si se hubiera retenido. Actualmente se estima que quedan 200,000 Bitcoins, pero no hay una auditoría clara, por lo que el Ejecutivo ordenará un registro oficial de los activos digitales del gobierno. Además, el Ejecutivo permitirá que los secretarios del Tesoro y del Comercio busquen estrategias para aumentar la reserva de Bitcoin, siempre que sea neutral en el presupuesto y no generen costos adicionales para los contribuyentes. Eso sí, tienen prohibido vender Bitcoin. A diferencia de la Reserva Estratégica de Bitcoin, la Reserva de Activos Digitales es un almacén para otras criptomonedas incautadas. Esta reserva no será tan grande como la de Bitcoin y por ahora no planean comprar más tokens. El secretario del Tesoro tiene permitido decidir si vende o modifican las tenencias de los tokens, según los intereses del país. No hay prohibición de venta en este caso, lo que lo diferencia claramente de la Reserva Estratégica de Bitcoin.
Bitcoin is the original cryptocurrency. It's the first one. It's the only one that doesn't have an issuer, right? It's very decentralized. It's, in crypto they call this the immaculate conception. We don't really know how it got here. We don't know who
No.
Satoshi is. It's almost mystical, you would say.
Yes.
It's the most valuable one. It has a $2 trillion market cap, and it's the most secure. It's never been hacked, right? So we're now, over 15 years into this journey, and there's been a lot of people who've been skeptical along the way, and there's been a lot of ups and downs, but here it is. I mean, I remember back in 2011, I think it's the first time I bought a Bitcoin. I think it was at $120. Now it's at $90,000. Again, there've been all sorts of wild swings along the way, but this thing just keeps chugging along. And you can think of that $2 trillion market cap as like a $2 trillion bug bounty. If there was a way to hack this, there's every incentive in the world. And by hack, I mean like to double spend, create basically a counterfeit Bitcoin, I guess would be the way for people to think about it. And
It
so the
is
security,
a miracle it hasn't been compromised. I think we can all say that.
well, I don't know if it's a miracle. I think it's exceptional design.
Sure.
And so I think what you could say is that it's been tested in a very robust way, and there's been every incentive to basically break the encryption, and it continues to chug along. And so I think the price has gone up as the protocol has gotten more acceptance. And this is another point, is that Bitcoin is the most widely accepted as a store of value throughout the world.
Yeah.
So we do believe it should be treated special. Now, that being said, we're also creating the digital asset stockpile. So all the other digital
explain
assets.
the difference between these two. So there's a digital asset stockpile. That's the picker. And then on the other side, there's a strategic reserve for Bitcoin, because we do acquire Bitcoin, we, the United States of America, when we seize from terrorists, criminals, et cetera. We do seize these. And then we often make the mistake of liquidating them when maybe we should be holding them. Yeah. So explain that architecture.
So we have the reserve and we have the stockpile. So the reserve is just Bitcoin. The goal is long-term preservation. Think of it as like a digital Fort Knox for digital gold. We want to put the digital gold in there. We want to keep it secure. We never want to sell it. That's the goal of the reserve. And you're right that we've made the mistake in the past of selling this stuff. At one point in time, we had about 400,000 Bitcoin on the federal balance sheet. We sold roughly half of that for something like $360 million total. If we had held all of that, it would be worth, just that the portion we sold would be worth over 17 billion. So we made this mistake of prematurely selling Bitcoin when we should have held it. We don't want to make that mistake with regard to the rest of it. We think there's around 200,000 coins left on the federal balance sheet, but the truth is that nobody knows because we've never done a proper audit. So part of what this executive order provides is that we're going to do for the first time a government-wide accounting of the digital assets that we actually have. So,
and if digital assets emerge in some department, I don't know, the FBI seizes some, the CIA seizes some, I don't know which organization winds up having them, they're going to be legally required to report that and then put them in the reserve.
Well, they'll be legally required to report it, and then they'll go in the reserve if there's a final adjudication. So, obviously, if those coins could go back as restitution to victims, or if the person who they were seized from wins their court case and gets them back, they're not going to go into the Federal Reserve. But if there's been a final adjudication and a final forfeiture, yes, those will go into the reserve. Anyway, that's Bitcoin. Okay, so then you got the stockpile. Let me just talk about that. So first of all, like I said, we don't know exactly what digital assets the federal government has. I've seen reports that it might have, for example, 50,000 ETH, which is Ethereum. But again, we need to get to the bottom of that. When we figure out exactly what the assets are, we're going to move them into the digital stockpile. The purpose of the stockpile is responsible stewardship. It's a place for safekeeping. It's a centralized, you could say, account under the direction of the Secretary of the Treasury. And the Secretary of the Treasury will figure out how to maximize the values of these holdings. Now, there's a couple of important differences between stockpile and reserve. So one is the reserve, the executive order actually provides that the Secretary of the Treasury will not sell the Bitcoin. Okay, we're prohibited from selling the Bitcoin. There's no such prohibition with respect to the stockpile. If the Secretary of the Treasury decides that it's in the long-term interest of the U.S. to rebalance the portfolio or change the portfolio, the Secretary has the discretion to do that. Look, I think that the stockpile should be subject to good portfolio management, right?
Excellent.
Unfortunately, we have a Secretary of the Treasury who is an extremely successful former hedge fund manager. So he's going to figure out the best way to manage these assets. And we give him the flexibility to do portfolio management. The reserve is different, right? The reserve is just digital Fort Knox. Now, there's one other important difference between stockpile and reserve. So with respect to reserve, the EE.UU provides that the secretaries, that I'm talking about Treasury and Commerce, they're allowed to figure out strategies to accumulate more Bitcoin for the reserve if those strategies are budget neutral and don't cost the taxpayer anything.
Okay. So it's possible that we could. I'm not saying that we will, but it authorizes them to acquire more Bitcoin if they can figure out a way to do it that doesn't impact the federal budget or the deficit or taxpayers, right?
El 7 de marzo se llevó a cabo la primera cumbre cripto de la Casa Blanca. Más de 25 líderes de la industria, entre ellos el CEO de Coinbase, Brian Armstrong, se sentaron con Donald Trump y su equipo. El objetivo, hablar del futuro de las criptos en Estados Unidos y cómo hacer de este país la capital mundial del cripto, como lo prometió Trump. Brian Armstrong expresó su entusiasmo por el giro positivo de la industria cripto que ha tomado bajo el liderazgo del Donald Trump. Destacó que tras años de ataques regulatorios, el nuevo enfoque ha traído claridad normativa, permitiendo que empresas como Coinbase expanda operaciones en Estados Unidos, incluyendo la contratación de 1,000 empleados. También resaltó el impacto de la creación de una reserva estratégica de Bitcoin por parte del gobierno de Estados Unidos, lo que podría consolidar la percepción de Bitcoin como el sucesor del patrón oro y fomentar así su adopción en el G20. Aunque la volatilidad de Bitcoin no desaparecerá, Armstrong considera positivo su crecimiento sostenido. En cuanto a la regulación, mencionó que el Congreso actual es el más pro-cripto de la historia y trabaja en leyes sobre monedas digitales y estructura de mercado. Dicha claridad traerá más inversiones y permitirá el crecimiento de grandes empresas cripto en Estados Unidos. Finalmente, Coinbase busca colaborar con el gobierno ofreciendo asesoramiento y eligiendo más legisladores favorables a las criptos en futuras elecciones.
CEO of Coinbase. Brian, thank you so much for joining me. It's great to see you.
Thank you for having me, yeah.
So what were your takeaways from the summit?
Well, President Trump really breathed life back into this industry. Over the last few years, we really felt like we were being unlawfully attacked by the prior administration. And under another fork of history, this industry might not have existed in the United States. It might have been moved entirely offshore. But luckily, the president has taken a leadership role here and decided to bring it back to the US, and it's already having positive results. For instance, Coinbase is planning to hire about 1,000 people here in the United States as a result of this industry getting regulatory clarity here in the US. And so they announced this strategic Bitcoin reserve last night as well, which I think is an incredible moment. If the United States government is now a holder of Bitcoin, maybe a buyer of Bitcoin in a budget neutral way that won't cost the taxpayer anything, I think the rest of the G20 are going to see that as a signal that Bitcoin is really the successor to the gold standard, and maybe the rest of the G20 should also hold a strategic Bitcoin reserve.
Do you think that the creation of the strategic Bitcoin reserve will stabilize Bitcoin, make it less volatile, and that it creates somewhat of a floor underneath the asset?
Well, I do think there's a lot of long holders of Bitcoin, and so that's already created a floor. But yeah, having the United States government be a holder of Bitcoin, just creates more buying pressure over time. So the goal is not necessarily to have Bitcoin have zero volatility. We want the price to go up over time. And things that are like stable coins, for instance, can be very flat in their pricing power, and so those are the medium of exchange, but we want Bitcoin to be kind of like a digital gold. So it's okay if it has some volatility with an upward trend over time.
The administration obviously working to create more clarity for your industry. Congress also looking to create rules of the road, something I know that you and many others in the industry have been thirsting for. What are you hearing from lawmakers on Capitol Hill as it relates to the market structure bill, either in the Senate or the House? What are your expectations on how quickly that could move? We heard from President Trump this afternoon. He's looking for something before the August recess, he said.
Yeah. That was very promising to hear as well, that he's really asked Congress to come back and pass legislation before August before the August recess. We're incredibly excited about the progress because I think this is the most pro-crypto Congress we've ever seen. They're already working on draft legislation in the House and the Senate around stablecoins, which we're very supportive of. That's going to help preserve the dollar's reserve currency status, a digital dollar. And then they're also starting to work on market structure legislation that would help clarify which of these crypto assets are commodities, securities, payment tokens, or something else like artwork. And so if they do that, it's going to bring in lots of new pools of capital into the US. The biggest crypto companies can finally get built here in the United States, and it would be a huge moment for American prosperity.
And before I let you go, Brian, how are you working with the administration? Do you see yourself teaming up in any way with the administration, whether it's the strategic Bitcoin reserve, the digital asset stockpile, or otherwise?
Yeah, Well, first and foremost, we want to just be an educational resource wherever we can be helpful, and we meet with legislators, members of Congress as well to try to give input from the industry where appropriate. But I think over the long term, we just want to help get crypto candidates elected in a bipartisan way.
Pero ¿por qué a pesar de estas noticias tan positivas y que el mundo del cripto estaba pidiendo a gritos este tipo de eventos, Bitcoin y las criptomonedas se están desplomando? Pues en primer lugar, por toda la incertidumbre que ha generado el tema de los aranceles impuestos por Donald Trump, generando temor entre inversores y provocando ventas masivas. En segundo lugar, porque los inversionistas esperaban una compra directa de Bitcoin por parte del gobierno de los Estados Unidos. Y en tercer lugar, los inversionistas quieren ganancias rápido, así que compraron el rumor de que se crearía la Reserva Estratégica de Bitcoin y vendieron una vez que se dio la noticia. Pero recuerda, invertir en Bitcoin es a largo plazo. Una vez que se publique cómo Estados Unidos acumulará más Bitcoin y de hecho empiece a acumular más, la tendencia cambiará de dirección y el precio de Bitcoin subirá como nunca antes. Sé paciente y nunca vendas tu Bitcoin. Dime qué opinas en los comentarios y no olvides darle like y suscribirte. Gracias, Rogers. Nos vemos en el próximo episodio.